The Israelites spent much of their time being subjugated by various nations. They weren't in control of their own country. They may have been God's chosen people, but for much of their history, they didn't have control over their own land, over their own nation. And so out of this period, they began to look back to the Scripture and began to see in there this hope for the Messiah. But as time and time grew, as we get to now the Romans being in charge of things, well, all of a sudden for the Jews at this time, for the Israelites, they now looked at this idea of the Messiah, not just as someone there who would bring salvation, bring redemption to Israel, but one who would rise up and be a mighty military ruler who would take the Romans and throw them out, and then Israel would be ruled by the Israelites once more. This is the idea that would have been popular in Jesus' time. This would have been how his disciples, how his followers looked at him. When they looked at him and said, yes, this is the Christ, this is the Messiah, they would have been expecting him to rise up and banish the Romans from Israel forever. So much to their surprise, that's not at all what happened, because Jesus, of course, is killed in a horrific and terrifying way by the Romans. And so the disciples and some of Jesus' followers run and hide because they're confused. This is not at all what they expected to happen. And that's what we hear from Cleopas in the gospel, in our gospel reading today. He's confused. He and his friend with him. They're confused because they expected all of these things from Jesus. They expected all these things to happen. And then all of a sudden, there goes Jesus. He's dead. And then, even more strange, all of a sudden, his body's gone. And there's all these visions of angels and other things telling them things about what's going on. It all seems very confusing. It all seems very contrary to what the plan was. Well, as the mysterious stranger who Cleopas finds himself with, who is none other than Jesus, tells him, is that these things actually were to be expected. It may not be in accordance with what they thought God's plan was, but that is the nature of God's plan, to turn our expectations upside down. And so Jesus shows them on the road to Emmaus that all of Scripture has actually been pointing to these things that were going to happen. They just weren't listening. This is true for our lives as well. We often expect God's plan to go one way, and many times God's plan turns our ideas of that plan on its head. That God's plan is the unexpected one. It's the one we weren't anticipating. What we're called to do in that is to realize that what God's plan for us may be is completely unexpected. But at the same time, we're called to stop and to listen. We're called to read Scripture in a new light with Jesus, just as he shows those on the road to Emmaus with him what Scripture is actually saying, helps them to read Scripture in a new and different light. With God, we should expect the unexpected. But if we stop and listen, well, maybe we won't be quite so surprised when the unexpected occurs.